Another journal for you, and I just released a video earlier in the month about weightlifting and kids, and one of my concerns about weightlifting. By the way, I'm Dr. Miller, if you don't know. Jason, just call me Jason. One of the concerns I had was that we tend to gravitate towards one ditch or the other when it comes to a lot of things. We tend to overreact, and so for years it was, and you can go back and watch the video if you want to, but I won't go down too far on the road because I want to talk about this article. But the tendency is to move away from whatever the extreme was. So the extreme was before is don't let kids lift weights. And then it was like, hey, it turns out growth fracture issues, epiphyseal plate fractures, right? That's all kind of myth and not supported. But kids could get hurt. So as long as we have supervision, qualified supervision, which is I think is there's not as much of that as we think. Qualified supervision, kids can lift weights. So there's been this pendulum shift to, hey, as long as there's a coach present or somebody knows what they're doing, hopefully, let the kids lift and they can lift heavy. And I'm not disputing that. I'm not disputing general weight training. Is depending on the form. That's what I'm gonna get at. Depending on the mode, how it's what lifts are done and how often, it can be beneficial. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But my concern was in the barbell sports, powerlifting and weightlifting, that we've taken that too far, and I don't think. A good coach won't. Okay, I train youth athletes, still do. Got 2 kids qualified for youth in the spring for weightlifting, or in the summer for weightlifting. I feel like I've pushed them at a reasonable pace. I let them, if they have something going on that's more the social realm, let them engage in that. Right, I don't want to burn them out when they're 13, 14, 15 years old. I don't want to burn them out at any age, but I want to be very careful. I don't squat my athletes until they're 13. Now, you can make an argument they can squat before that. That's fine. But the point is we need to be careful. We need to be careful. We need to be thoughtful and need to ask the question, do I need to do this? And if they aren't a barbell sport, like they want to be a power lifter and they're 10 years old, fine. But there needs to be, and I say that not flippantly, there needs to be a careful planning and a careful management of load, especially in those exercises that are going to load the spine. We don't have any data that that has any sort of that I've seen anyway. That there's some studies that are, they're okay. They're not well done, and the volume of training was ridiculously high. But we don't have much data. I won't say we don't have any because I may not be aware of something. But we don't have much data that says, hey, as these individuals age, when they started early and specialized early with barbell, that their spines don't have issues. A study that would be interesting is to take some of these IWF athletes or even some of the high-level powerlifting athletes that have been lifting since they were children, and pre-13 years old, and maybe even early adolescents, and see, have a survey and see what kind of back issues they have. If they have none, and again, this is a selection bias, okay? This is a survivorship bias, like the strong will survive. That's a good place to start, though. If these individuals are saying, no, I don't have any back issues, okay, fantastic. The next thing would be, okay, let's track those that have been lifting when they were youth athletes and see where they are now, right? Find some of those individuals who are adults and then see if they have any back problems. If the elite athletes have back problems, again, that could be a thing where they had an exorbitant amount of volume beyond, so we can't say for sure that, oh yeah, that early specialization with barbell is bad. But it would be a sign that maybe something is there that we need to be, right? If these elite athletes who can tolerate some crazy training loads are being broken when they're older, right? So I say all that to say I don't know the answer. I just think we need to be careful. Again, we tend to go to the other ditch. And my concern is we'll go to the other ditch so far later on, 15, 20 years from now, we're going to have a bunch of athletes that have had back problems because of early specialization with barbell. If you've ever been to a high school powerlifting meet, it makes me want to throw up in my mouth, right? Some of the stuff that these kids are doing. What does that mean for their long-term back health? I don't know. I really don't know. But again, we need to be careful. So this article is called Weightlifting for Children and Adolescents, a Narrative Review by 3 prominent researchers, coaches. The first one is Kyle Pierce. He's Kendrick Ferris's coach. He's coached multiple Olympians. Guy Hornsby is a well-known strength conditioning researcher, coach. And then, of course, Michael Stone, one of those OGs in the strength conditioning field, if you don't know who that is. So in the American scene, anyway. one of those early pioneers, along with his wife in strength conditioning, Meg Stone. So the authors of, a well-qualified group is what I'm getting at, that are both coaches and researchers. They're not both. They're not one or the other. One's, some are more toward coaches, some more toward research, but they're doing both. And this is a narrative review, as the name implies, the title of the article implies, and it goes through, why weightlifting is safe, the background, some of the physiology, it points out that the acute injury rate, in other words, being hurt in a session or something like that, is very low for weightlifting. I agree with that. Obviously, the data is the data. And being a coach, I've only had one athlete get significantly injured in the weight room in an acute setting, a session. The other injuries and the ones I'm more concerned about are more chronic injuries, right? Knees, backs, and stuff like that over time. And that's just trying to manage volume properly. But it does a good job of talking about this article. It could be a manual. It'd be nice if this was a manual for every weightlifting coach in the world, but certainly in the United States, every powerlifting coach, even though this is more about weightlifting, weightlifting, snatch, clean, jerk, this would be a helpful manual for every single coach in the United States. Because it has this physiological background and it has the stages, the long-term athlete development model, and understanding those stages that athletes go through, and then matching. The article does a good job of talking about how to match training, appropriate training for each phase, right? So, when an athlete is younger, what does training look like? When an athlete's more towards adolescence, and then the late adolescence, what does the training look like? So a good job of that. It doesn't necessarily give you sets and reps per se, but it does. Again, the article does a good job of building this framework to work from as a coach when working with kids. And again, so giving this credence to this idea that it's okay for kids to do weightlifting if done in a supervised coach. And this is kind of a circular thing. This article is needed in order to produce better qualified coaches. I'm a better coach than I was. I'm a better coach today than I was 5 years ago, and I should be. And so, even if I was a quote unquote certified, not quote unquote, but a certified coach, a good coach, quote unquote, good coach, working with young athletes. If I've never worked with young athletes before, and I've only worked with college athletes or whatever, I might not fully understand that a youth athlete shouldn't be punished. And I mean by punished, I've seen athletes look like they're being punished with the amount of volume that they're doing as a youth athlete. Again, that my concern is, we're going to the other side. And I could be wrong. I will happily be wrong if it turns out that loading youth athletes early on and athletes in early adolescence is fine and there's no issues with their spine, assuming the qualified instruction, right? But it just concerns me a little bit that we've kind of lost our minds. And with the explosion of weightlifting and powerlifting for youth, especially weightlifting, because it's been so well done by USAW, in the draw and the lure for these big meets. And USAW, to give them credit, have tried to focus more on technique with these younger kids and reward coaches not to push them, essentially. And I think that's great. I'm just concerned that that's not across the board. And I've seen professionals in the rehabilitation sciences and other high level people that have pushed this. Let's get rid of this this misinformation about kids and weight training, that as long as they're supervised, everything's okay. We don't know that. And this article points to the long-term effects, and I think it tries to, the authors try to keep an even hand here, but they cite resistance training studies to say long-term outcomes with resistance training seem to be favorable. Okay. But what about weightlifting? What about sport-specific weightlifting and powerlifting? Okay. Again, we don't know. I'm not against those. Obviously, I'm coaching youth athletes, but I think there needs to be more thought and more articles like this one given to coaches, and more education, and less of this message of, hey, as long as the technique's good, let them have it. We just don't know. I might be wrong. All right. I know I'm talking in circles here, but this is something that's really, I've been alive long enough to see human nature is to go from one ditch to the other. And, then if we go all the way to the other ditch and it turns out a lot of people are getting back injuries and shoulder injuries and maybe even hip injuries, knee problems because of early specialization with barbell, then we're going to swing back the other way. And then, well, no, kids shouldn't lift weight. Well, the reality is every kid is different, what they can tolerate volume wise, and their age matters. They're different. I think this article does a really good job talking about the sociological parts of being an athlete. A young athlete doesn't, you can burn them out really early, even if they're a go-getter, right? You have to understand their maturity. You have to look long term. If you have an elite athlete and you're looking down the road, you don't want to burn them out, injure them when they're young. That we don't want to burn them out, injure them anyway. But you certainly don't want to do that. I've seen junior athletes that were junior champions, but they're so busted up by the time they're done that, I mean, at 20 years old, they're burned out and they're broken. I mean, that shouldn't be. Okay. So anyway, this article is called Weightlifting for Children and Adolescents, a Narrative. I'll put the link in the video description from Sports Health. 3 good authors. I would highly recommend it. It has the kind of scientific background. It does have scientific background, all the way up to the more practical application of how to keep an equipment area safe, right? I mean, how to treat kids, how recovery, monitoring, competition, all these things. It doesn't have sets and reps per se, but it does have a great outline to get started. Again, this should be a manual, in my opinion. If USAW ever gets a hold of this, I would highly recommend it. Make it a mandatory thing you give with your level 1, regardless if somebody says, well, I'm not working with kids. Well, you never know. So here you go. Here's an article to at least get the individual thinking about promoting the sport among kids, sure, but also doing it with an even hand and staying out of these 2 ditches. And again, the ditch right now is more of going too hard with these kids. Okay. Hopefully this was a helpful video, especially if you're in coaching barbell athletes, or you have a barbell athlete, or you're a young barbell athlete. I think just having some common sense maybe, and asking questions about how much volume is too much, how much frequency of training is too much. Maybe I'll outline some programs that I've used with youth in the future. Not to say that I haven't made mistakes with youth too, and that's part of this as well, is realizing that maybe there's a few youth athletes that I pushed a little too hard. Nothing significant, but looking back on it, I'm like, I should have been more careful, because I've started drifting out of that ditch, because as a young coach, it was like, hey, youth can do anything. It's like, well, true, but should they? And what does that look like? What does resistance training look like? All right, I'll see you on the next video. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and like this video if you don't like it. And again, I'll see you in the next one.